to know that the rector is given me a very kind introduction. Thank you, sir, for going through my bio. I did understand a few things like Georgetown University, and it seems you mentioned that I speak Russian, so yes, English is my preferred language, of course, but if you would like to ask me a question in Russian, you're welcome to do so. In Armenian, I'm sorry to say I don't have any luck. But I wanted to start with a few words about NATO's relationship with Armenia, because we are, in this year, we are in our 25th year. It is the 25th anniversary of Armenia's cooperation with NATO, and it has been a very positive 25 years. We have done so much together that, first of all, I wanted to say thank you and how much we appreciate our cooperation. Armenia is the only one of our partners who has consistently provided troops for both our KFOR mission in Kosovo and also the Resolute Support mission in Afghanistan, and we appreciate that cooperation very, very much. You've also conveyed to NATO that you are willing to make, for example, military medical units available and some other military units available for NATO operations. And so this is very, very much appreciated. It is something that makes for a very strong partnership between Armenia and NATO. So I wanted to start out by saying a word of thanks to you all, a word of thanks to the people of Armenia, and also to your government. Now a few words about NATO itself. Sometimes people think about NATO as being a very militaristic organization, but actually the more I have been at NATO, the more I realize that it is what it says it is. That is a defensive organization, an alliance of countries who are pledged to defend each other from aggression, but also an organization that is political military. It's not just a military alliance, but it is a political military alliance, and that means that we also are proud as an institution that we support the rule of law internationally. We support sovereignty and territorial integrity. We support international law principles overall, and are constantly, in the way we work, trying to convey that we act within the bounds of international law. That is why, for example, we have deployed 4 battle groups in the Baltic states and in Poland over the last year and a half. And those battle groups are in response to concerns about Russia's seizure of Ukrainian territory and their aggressive actions toward our NATO allies in that region. But we always stress, and I want to underline this, we always stress that actions that we take are defensive, proportionate, and in line with international law. So we will always continue to try in every way we can to advance those principles, including in working in our missions and operations abroad. Now, as we prepare for our next summit meeting, which is coming up in July of 2018 in Brussels in our brand new headquarters, you will be seeing increasingly on the news our new headquarters, which we will be moving into during the spring. We will be really focused on 2 different, I would say, core tasks for NATO. One is continuing to provide for the deterrence and defense of our allies, but the other core task is in an area that we call projecting stability, and that means we are working with allies and with partners to look for ways to tackle the important, I would say, more recent security challenges that are facing us, and particularly the fight against terrorism. Last week we had an important meeting of our Mediterranean dialogue partners in Brussels. These are the countries that are around the rim of the Mediterranean, particularly in North Africa, but also extending, interestingly, to Egypt and Israel. So we have Tunisia, Algeria, those countries are included, but also then Egypt and Israel sit at that table. So it's a very interesting mix of countries who are our partners in that area. But we are working with them to look for new ways to fight terrorism, to ensure that the flow of migrants is carried on in an orderly way, that we don't have more drownings in the Mediterranean. So we work with European Union very closely on something called Operation Sophia. That's the European Union's sea operation. And NATO has an operation called Operation Sea Guardian. And we are working with the Coast Guards, for example, of Libya, to ensure that migrants, if they are in boats that founder at sea, that we are able to help rescue them in a timely manner. So NATO is involved in a lot of work also, as we say. Well, NATO, we like to say, is a 360-degree organization, so it faces up to threats and challenges from wherever they may stem. And by the way, I often hear questions about, well, a lot of terrorism is emerging in the Caucasus, for example, or in Central Asia. We are worried. I hear from my colleagues in Moscow. We are worried, they say, about terrorists coming out of Afghanistan into Central Asia and moving into Russian territory. And I always say, well, we are a 360-degree organization, so we are ready to work on problems wherever they stem from, as long as they are part of NATO's core tasks, which include the fight against terrorism, projecting stability, but also then deterrence and defense for our allies. Before I open up the floor to your questions, one final point I'd like to make, and that is I've mentioned how concerned NATO has been about Russia's aggressive actions over the past years since 2014 and the seizure of Crimea. We have been very concerned about that. But at the Warsaw Summit in 2016 in July, we made, I think, as an alliance, a key decision, and that was that it is necessary to pursue not only deterrence and defense of the alliance, but also to pursue dialogue as well. This is very much part of NATO's historic approach. Back in 1967, we put out a report called the Harmel Report. You might remember from your history that 1966 and 1967 were years of great crisis for NATO. That was when France decided to withdraw from the military command and control structures of the alliance. And the alliance had to leave its headquarters in Paris and move to Brussels very quickly. Over a period of just a year, it was moved from Paris to Brussels. And the Belgian government, its foreign minister, Pierre Harmel, said, we have to take a deep look at what this alliance is, and we have to address this crisis head on. So in 1967, the Harmel report came out saying, we must pursue deterrence and defense, but we also must pursue détente and dialogue. And that's been the kind of basic philosophy of the NATO alliance ever since. So we just also celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Harmel report 2 weeks ago, and I read it again. It's only 7 pages long. I really recommend it to you if you're interested in the history of NATO. It's available on the NATO website. It's easy reading in English and in French. And the end of the story is that we have picked up those very themes today in the way we think about how to work with Russia. And that is, we must continue to pursue deterrence and defense, to convey that we will defend our allies, but also we must be open to dialogue, and we must do everything we can to pursue dialogue in order to ensure that incidents, accidents don't spin out of control and turn into a crisis, and maybe even a conflict again in Eurasia. Nobody wants that. So with that, colleagues, again, thank you very much for this opportunity to address you this morning. I'm very eager to hear your questions. I understand from talking to the rector that there might be some tough ones, but please, let's have a good conversation. So now the floor is over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Svekharceri նախապատմությունը սկզբից տալիս են ուսանողներին։ Խնդրեմ, համեցեք։ Ներկայացեք, խնդրեմ, հետո հարցրեք։
as an institute of collective security based on mutual political values and visions of development. But on the other hand, there are some tensions between NATO allies. For example, the issue of GSC islands between Turkey and Greece with an obvious point of open military actions. So how does NATO intermediate to settle these issues?
Well, I will put it this way, just because we are allies, it doesn't mean that we are best friends in some cases. And indeed, among some of our allies, there are very long-standing disputes, sometimes territorial disputes, sometimes extending far back in history. First of all, from the Brussels headquarters of NATO, we are always very strongly supportive of our alliance members. But we say, when you have these kinds of bilateral disputes, we are not going to be the facilitators. We in NATO headquarters, we will not facilitate. It's up to you to solve in a bilateral way the disputes that you may have. And so we urge our allies to work together in that way. It is no question that over many, many years there have been various disputes between Turkey and Greece, but I will also say there are examples, excellent examples of cooperation in NATO formats. And I mentioned before Sea Guardian and also Operation Sophia. That's in the central Mediterranean, really facing Libya and that area. But there is also an excellent operation in the eastern Aegean Sea to help to again regulate the flow of migrants in that area and ensure that people aren't getting drowned as they're trying to migrate. And there, the Turkish and the Greek navies and the coast guards, with other NATO participants, particularly Germany, has been very active in that operation, have been working together and cooperating very well. So I always urge people when they see, the headlines and they see, oh, there's another dispute going on between Athens and Ankara, to look also at the bigger picture and consider ways in which, in the alliance particularly, countries are working closely together and helping to address some of the security problems that we're all facing, like in this case, the problems that may be caused by unregulated migration. So it's, it's very interesting to ensure that the alliance continues to work smoothly. But I will just say one other thing about how the alliance works, and that it is an alliance that operates by consensus. So from the smallest allies, such as Albania and Montenegro is our newest member. We were very proud last June to welcome Montenegro to the alliance. All the way to the biggest allies, the United States of America. Every single ally has a seat at the table and has a vote. And so if any ally decides they don't like something that NATO is doing, they have a veto. Everything has to be decided by consensus. This is my first time working in such a large multilateral setting. I think I heard the director say that most of my career has been spent working bilaterally with Russia and the Soviet Union before it on matters to do with nuclear arms control and non-proliferation. So I'm most used to bilateral diplomacy, which is complicated enough, but when you multiply it to 29 people around the table and everybody has to get to yes, it gets pretty complicated. But I think that's an important point too. Despite our differences inside the alliance, we can still get to yes when we have to solve important problems.
Good morning. My name is Araika Sargsyana. I'm a third-year student of the Faculty of International Relations. Thank you very much for your visit and for your speech about migration. So, since the 16th enlargement in 2009, it was widely believed that the NATO is no longer interested in accepting new states. However, the Montenegro Association showed that the organization still considers enlargement. And does the NATO have any vision concerning the future of integration? Will it pay more attention to deepening or enlarging integration? Thank you very much.
Well, the answer is both. Deepening cooperation among our partners and also continuing to have an open door. One of the most basic facets of the NATO treaty, the so-called Washington Treaty, the article that states that NATO membership is open to any country in the European area that would like to join. That's part of the NATO treaty. It's embedded in our founding document from 1949. So that means that the door is always open, and the door will be always open. But also the second part of that is that countries who are interested in membership have to be up to NATO standards, so to say, and they have to work very hard to ensure defense institutions, their military forces, and their whole approach to national institutions is based on the rule of law. Again, principles like strong civilian control of the military, these all have to be part of the basic approach that a country takes. And so when we have countries interested in joining, we have a partnership action plan, and we work very long and hard to ensure that countries are carrying out the reforms they need to carry out, are structuring their military forces in the right way. And that's a long and arduous process, so it's very difficult. And the final thing I say, I mentioned a moment the consensus rule. There has to be consensus around the table among all 29 now NATO members that a country is ready to join. But yes, the door is still open. That's one of our very basic principles, and it will remain open. You may remember the so-called Bucharest Summit from 2008. We are now approaching the 10th anniversary of the Bucharest Summit, at which it was stated that we would look at membership for a number of countries in the Western Balkans, and also including Georgia and Ukraine. So that's the 10th anniversary is this year, and I want to say once again that we have, I would say, two basic principles. One is that the door is always open, and second, that countries have the right to choose their own security partners, their own security relationships. And NATO doesn't demand any country engage with us, but likewise, we say always that countries have an inherent right to choose how they organize for their own security, and so they have a right to choose what countries they will work with and what arrangements they will work with to advance their security. So that's where things stand at the moment. We still say that, and I do want to end on this point, that countries have to work very hard to be ready for NATO membership. And that's why I'm not saying for the upcoming summit that any decisions have been made. We have a summit, as I mentioned, coming up in July of next year, and the alliance will be looking very hard at whether there are any countries who are ready to be considered for active membership.
Thank you.
Madam Andresen, Faculty of International Relations. As we all know, NATO is an active process of military integration through bilateral agreements and membership of the countries of former Yugoslavia. So, taking into account that Serbia claimed military neutrality in 2007, and the generations of the Serbs who saw NATO's bombing of Belgrade are still alive, how do you see the future of this cooperation? Thank you.
It's another excellent question. I've spent a lot of time in Serbia over the last 6 months. I was honored to attend President Vucic's inauguration back in June, and then just had a very good trip to Serbia in the fall as well. And we are working closely with Serbia, but it picks up on my answer to the last question, which is countries have the right to decide their own security relationships. And if a country is focused on cooperating with a different set of countries, that's absolutely fine. It's possible to, as we see it, it's possible to do more of a balanced approach, so to say, than just focusing on cooperation with NATO. In the case of Serbia, we understand, first of all, that they are very interested in moving toward EU membership in the European Union, and so we fully support that. But second, we also understand that Serbia has a close defense and security relationship with Russia, and that's entirely up to them. But the third thing I'll say is that Serbia also has a good cooperative relationship with NATO, and I was in Serbia to talk about the several ways that we are cooperating together. For example, Serbia has just itself, I mentioned that Armenia does some military medical work with us, but Serbia has just begun to do some military medical training for the Iraqis, and it's very interesting. They are working together with the Belgians and the Germans as a kind of bilateral cooperation to train military medical workers for the Iraq operations. So it's a very, I think it's a very good program of cooperation with Serbia, and I would like to continue to see it develop in the future, because I think it's mutually beneficial for both Belgrade, but I think also for all of NATO and what we are trying to achieve through our operations in Iraq and elsewhere.
Thank you.
Спасибо огромное. Мы вам благодарны за ваш приезд в Армению. Мы долго с вами дружили в Твиттере, но 4 месяца вас нету там. Хотя ваш многоуважаемый президент каждый день в Твиттере, и это помогает, кстати, понятию решения проблем в мире. Мой вопрос маленький, но очень важный. Я, как президент Академии геополитики, представляюсь, Араика Саргсяна, был долгое время почетным консулом Македонии в Армении. Как экс-консул Македония, Уругвай и 6 штатов вашей прекрасной страны США признали независимость Нагорно-Карабахской республики. Я хочу узнать, какова ваша позиция к решению этой проблемы? Личная позиция, позиция НАТО в решении Нагорно-Карабахской проблемы военной агрессии Азербайджана против народа Нагорного Карабаха. И маленькую ремарку, огромное спасибо, мы тоже вас за вами следим. Вот. Ну, когда Македония станет членом НАТО? Спасибо.
Those are two not so simple questions, not one simple question. And by the way, I don't have, in this current job, I don't have a personal opinion. I'm the representative of NATO, so I will stress that point in answering you. But first of all, I did mention the Bucharest Summit decision from 2008, and that focused actually on 4 countries, including the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. I also mentioned Ukraine and Georgia. So, as I said, those are essentially the Bucharest Summit decision stands, so they are still among the countries that NATO is looking at now. I want to stress again, coming up to the summit meeting in July of 2018, that no decisions have been made, and we will have to see what happens. As you know, with Macedonia, they need to work out the name question with Athens. So Skopje and Athens, I know, have been having some pretty intensive discussions even in recent weeks, so I want to hope that they will be able to move toward a resolution. But it's, again, one of those bilateral issues that NATO, from where we sit in Brussels, we don't try to facilitate it, we don't try to interfere. It's up to Macedonia and Greece to figure that one out. So we will see what happens. I don't know when the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia will become a member of NATO. It's somewhat up to them, and it's somewhat up to the resolution of some bilateral issues with Greece. By the way, they still have some work to do on military reform and political reform, having gone through a long period of political instability and difficulty. So they are, I would say, on a very positive trajectory now, but they still have reform work to do there as well. On Nagorno-Karabakh, you know, I worked for President Clinton back in the 1990s, and I remember very much the early days of the crisis then. I regret that, 25 or more years have gone by, and the conflict is still unresolved. Again, this is a case where I think it's very important for Azerbaijan and Armenia to be working together. I was glad that the foreign ministers got together in the OSCE ministerial meeting, or on the margins of the OSCE ministerial meeting 2 weeks ago in Vienna. The presidents have met recently in October. I think that is excellent. I know the Minsk co-chairs and Rex Tillerson was at NATO and then he went to the OSCE meeting. I was delighted that the United States at such a high level is again engaging as one of the Minsk co-chairs along with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and the French, of course, also involved. So from a NATO chair, we only hope to see new momentum in resolving that crisis, and I think it will be good for this entire region and resolved. And on behalf of NATO, would just say that we are very positively glad to see the recent high-level diplomatic efforts and hope that it will get there soon.
Thank you very much.
I find the more I'm in the job, and I'm only in this job just 1 year and a few months, so I'm still learning the job. As we say in American English, I'm still getting my feet under my desk. So I am finding that increasingly all the allies are coming to my door and saying, can you help with this, that, or the other problem? And so I take that as a sign that somehow I'm shedding my Americanness as time goes on and becoming more and more the international civil servant.
Thank you. Duk, koruyor. Duk çekecek barsatsı. Oh.
Thank you very much for passing me the voice. I am Siran Pirovanian, the Faculty of International Relations. I would like to thank you for your being here, for your presence. And as for my question, as we all know, the two contradicting parts of the Cold War were NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Both the NATO and the Warsaw Pact led to the expansion of military forces and their integration. After the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, NATO still exists with the above-mentioned activities. My question is, who does this expansion lead to be against when the Warsaw Pact does no longer exist? Thank you beforehand.
As I've mentioned, that NATO is a defensive alliance and also a political military alliance. It is an alliance as we see it that brings certain principles to bear on the international stage. And so it is defending, in a way, not only territory, but also principles of international law like territorial integrity and sovereignty, I think, are at the forefront of the list. And so, in a way, I don't like to think of NATO as being an alliance against anyone or any country, but an alliance that stands for certain important principles and rules of international law and is ready to defend allies if anything should happen that impinges on their basic rights of territorial integrity, for example. The other thing that I think NATO stands for very strongly is dealing with some of these new and modern threats that are confronting us. I mentioned a moment ago the threat of terrorism, and I think that's an excellent example of how NATO stands for defending against non-state actors who would cause violence to the public, to innocent citizens, who would really try to undermine the basic framework of our peaceful life. I know it sounds maybe a little bit like a cliche, but it's for everyone to be worried about terrorism today. And so it's very important that we have defense institutions who are ready to stand and defend when there are non-state actors who really have these unpredictable ways of attacking, and you need to be ready. There are other brand new, I would say, just in the last decade or two, threats that are emerging, and particularly in the cyber realm, cyber attacks that we have had to think hard about how to defend. So it's really an organization that is quite resilient and looks to the future and considers new threats. And that's maybe the last point I'd like to stress in answering your question is we don't see a return to the Cold War. We see a different world nowadays, and it is a world that is defined by different challenges and different threats, and so NATO has to be thinking in terms of how to defend against this wider array of threats and challenges.
Dr. Warren Petrosian, actually I'm the head of the the chair of international relations and diplomacy at the Yerevane State University. My question is about Iraqi Kurdistan and Iraq. Actually, I have made a field research in Iraqi Kurdistan, and I would like to know NATO's official position on Iraq, on Kurdistan regional government, especially after the independence referendum, taking into account the fact that Baghdad reoccupied disputed territories, and there are some clinches and very difficult relation between the two parties. So what is NATO's official position, and what is the best case scenario for NATO in Iraq? Thank you.
The basic, the basic rules I've been talking about throughout our discussion this morning apply in Iraq as well. And so NATO stands for territorial and integrity and sovereignty of Iraq too, but particularly territorial integrity. And we urge the government in Baghdad to work closely and in a positive way with the Kurdish government, which has been a force for stabilization and for economic development and for generally improving the overall outlook of the country. And so we've been urging the Baghdad government to focus on unity, to focus on ways to work with the Kurds, to provide for perhaps some special status for them. But again, it's not that NATO is the negotiator, the facilitator. We are urging certain policies that then will be, we hope, carried forward by the Baghdad government, working with the government of Iraqi Kurdistan. But it's not for us to solve the problem, so to say. But we are very clear, once again, that we stand for territorial integrity and sovereignty at the same time that for groups who have some autonomous characteristics to them, that special arrangements may need to be worked out, and that's for the central government to work out with the Iraqi Kurds. What NATO's goals are, they've changed in recent years, and Jens Stoltenberg, my boss, the Secretary General, likes to stress that what we are doing now, not only in Afghanistan, but increasingly in Iraq as well, is to give them the tools, the resources to be able to maintain security and stability over time in those countries. So it's basically what we call a train the trainers kind of approach. So we have in Afghanistan Resolute Support Mission now as a train, advise, and assist mission. It's not a combat mission. What we are doing is training not only the Afghan National Army, but also the Afghan police forces to be able to defend territory in Afghanistan. Our operation now, our activities, I should stress, in Iraq are rather more modest. They are modest, as we put it in the Warsaw Summit, to be modest and scalable. Now we are looking for ways to scale up our activities in Iraq. I mentioned a moment ago that we already have this project with the Serbs, Germans, and Belgians to develop more military medical experts for Iraq. Another important project is to help the Iraqis learn how to repair their Warsaw Pact era equipment. They have a lot of vehicles and other kinds of military equipment that's Warsaw Pact era, and they need to know best how to repair it. So we have other courses that are devoted to maintenance of Warsaw Pact era equipment. You can see it's kind of straightforward and pragmatic kinds of projects, and we're looking for ways to scale up those projects over time. One thing we haven't talked about yet this morning is so-called UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. That's another area where we are working in Afghanistan and also would like to do more work in Iraq. And by the way, I'll be doing a speech in just a few moments for the workshop that's going on that will address this 1325 issue more fully. But I just wanted to say one word about special ways that we try to work on 1325 issues. We try to, again, to be very pragmatic and focused. So in Afghanistan, we wanted to encourage them to bring more women into the police forces. And by the way, I understand that's a direction also that Armenia has been taking, to try to train more women and bring them into the police forces. And I think that's very good for a more efficient and effective police force. Frankly, we've seen a lot of statistics that when women come into the police forces, for example, in Ukraine, the level of corruption went down. So I think it's an important direction to look at. And in Afghanistan, we did something very simple. We built dormitories for the women, because obviously in a society like Afghanistan, they couldn't live in co-ed dorms. They had to have their own space to live safely while they were being trained. So again, it's very straightforward, it's very pragmatic, it's very simple, but those are the kinds of projects that NATO likes to undertake. We like to say we keep it simple, but we try to make the foundation strong so that progress can occur when countries are training and developing new capabilities, such as having women in the police forces. There's one over there.
Vercha, the last question, please.
Good morning. My name is Musara Tamara. I'm the third-year student of the Faculty of International Relations. Thank you for your visit. So my question, recently the U.S. approved the sale of Javelin anti-tank missiles to Georgia, causing some criticism even in the U.S. Congress. What NATO's opinion on that? Thank you.
This is a question that often comes our way because a lot of countries are asking NATO for military equipment and weapon systems. And again, it is up to NATO member states to make those decisions about training, not only training, but sales of weapons or provision of weapons, licensing weapon systems to various countries. So this is really, from our perspective, from NATO's perspective, a bilateral matter between Washington and Tbilisi. It's not something that NATO was involved in any way. And I want to stress that once again, that it's an important question, an important set of questions. It's being grappled with now in Washington, also with regard to Ukraine, whether or not to send defensive weapons to the Ukrainians. I don't know where that decision will come out, because again, it's not up to NATO. It's not NATO's responsibility. But we do provide for, as I said, training and trying to advise and assist countries to be able to be more effective. We have an excellent relationship with Georgia and a very large expert group there working. In fact, we have the head of the NATO liaison office, Ms. Rosario Polisi, here with us today. She's also representing the South Caucasus in her work in Georgia. So I'm really very glad she's here with us today. But in terms of, the sale or the provision of Javelin from the United States to Georgia, NATO doesn't have a position per se on that. That's up to those countries to decide.
Thank you very much. Fortunately, time is over because I know that you have another meeting at the university. Thank you very much. Շնորհակալ եմ շատ այսօրվա հանդիպման համար եւ թույլ տվեք նվիրեմ մեր հյուրին մեր գրքերից. Let me give you two books. One booklet. This is booklet of our Yerevan State University.
Great.
This is top 50 sites of Armenia for you.
Super.
And album of our famous painter Shmavonyan.
Lovely. Thank you very, very much.
Mr. Markarov, please.
All right. Okay, but before I hand over the books, Rector, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Can I apply?
Yeah. Yes.
I wanted to say thank
Sure.
you to you all. You have obviously an excellent faculty here of international relations and politics. Your questions have been excellent, and I truly enjoyed our early morning meeting. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.